Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Order of the Phoenix is the longest book in the entire series, a hefty 832 pages, and even the incomparable J.K. Rowling, with such a vast canvas, couldn't avoid serious plot holes and logical gaps. Today, we're going to break down the most striking ones. Enjoyed the video. Number 1. Hermione and the House Elves. After the events of Goblet of Fire, Hermione becomes almost obsessively committed to freeing house elves. She knits clothes for them and leaves them around the Gryffindor common room, hoping the elves will take the items and become free. But it all backfires. The elves are offended, stop coming altogether, and the only one left cleaning is Dobby. The logic here starts to wobble. Chamber of Secrets made it very clear. A house elf can only be freed by their master. Hermione had no authority to do this. Even if we imagine that the elves thought Dumbledore had left the clothing, then by that logic, any random sweater or sock lying around a house would instantly free them. That would make service to a wizard extremely unstable, and the house elf class would have ceased to exist long ago. Number 2, the hearing. Harry's trial at the Wizengamot begins with him nearly arriving late, and only Arthur Weasley ensures he makes it on time. He's charged with underage use of magic, which is indeed against the law. But one of the charges seems strange. Harry allegedly cast magic in the presence of a muggle, violating the statute of secrecy. The problem is the muggle, Dudley, already knew about the wizarding world. So technically, secrecy wasn't broken at all. This detail undermines the Wizengamot's competence and makes it seem like the case was held together with duct tape. Number 3, the trace. At the start of the book, Dementors attack Harry and Dudley. To save his cousin, Harry casts a Patronus, and the Ministry immediately tries to expel him. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, believing Harry is at fault, lock him in his room, just as they did in Chamber of Secrets. The situation is resolved when the Order of the Phoenix arrives and takes Harry to number 12, Grimmauld Place. But here we hit a plot snag. The trace is placed not on a wizard, but on their place of residence, if there are no adult witches or wizards nearby. That means the Ministry should have detected every single spell Tonks used. Lumos, cleaning charms, packing spells, and the charm that made Harry's trunk slide down the stairs. Yet the Ministry conveniently ignored all of that, focusing only on Harry's Patronus. Number 4, Prefect powers. After Draco Malfoy joins Umbridge's inquisitorial squad, he deducts points from Gryffindor and Hufflepuff for making negative remarks about the defense teacher. Ernie Macmillan objects, claiming prefects have no right to take points. But in Chamber of Secrets, Percy Weasley did exactly that without hesitation, taking points from his own house after catching Ron in the second-floor bathroom. So Ernie was wrong. Prefects could deduct points. The real question is, who oversees this process? What's to stop someone like Malfoy from randomly taking 100 points from Gryffindor just for fun? And is there any kind of log keeping track of who deducted what and why? Number 5. The Department of Mysteries. In the 5th book, members of the Order of the Phoenix take turns guarding the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries. It's here that Arthur Weasley is attacked by Nagini. Naturally, you'd expect security to be at the highest possible level. But in the finale, Death Eaters get in without much trouble. Worse yet, the Order members arrive with a noticeable delay, leaving Harry and his friends to fend for themselves. Dramatically, it's a tense moment. Logically, not so much. Number 6, Dennis Creevey. In the films we see Colin Creevey, but his younger brother Dennis, introduced in Goblet of Fire, never made it on screen. He was sorted into Gryffindor and managed to fall into the Black Lake on his very first day while crossing to the castle. In Order of the Phoenix, Dennis is shown attending a Dumbledore's army meeting at the Hog's Head, but at that point he was only a second year, which means he wasn't allowed to visit Hogsmeade under school rules. This is yet another detail that seems to have slipped through unnoticed. Number 7. Flight on Thestrals. The moonlight fell over the Hogwarts grounds as the Thestrals shifted restlessly, their leathery wings twitching. Harry reached for the nearest one, his hand brushing the cold, bony neck. "You'll have to trust them," Luna said calmly, already mounting her own. Neville followed without hesitation, but behind them, Ron and Hermione groped at the air, climbing onto creatures they couldn't see. There was no stumble, no awkward grasp at nothing. They simply swung a leg over and held on, as if invisible horses were part of their daily commute. According to the rules the books themselves set, Thestrals can only be seen by those who have witnessed death and truly understood it. Harry could guide himself. Luna and Neville could too, but how could Ron and Hermione stay mounted on something entirely unseen, especially when the creatures took off into the night sky? The text skips over any struggle, giving no clue whether they were guided or magically secured. One moment they were climbing thin air, the next they were flying over the forbidden forest, trusting in what they couldn't see. And the story never stops to explain how. Number 8. Umbridge's magic in the forest. Dolores Umbridge pushed her way between the thick, twisted trunks, wand raised. The shadows of the forbidden forest pressed close, the air damp and heavy. When the centaurs emerged, their bows drawn, she didn't hesitate. "Incarcerus!" she shouted, ropes flying from her wand with perfect precision. It was a bold display for someone whose magical skill was usually spent on sealing notices to the castle walls or charming her quill to write in blood. The scene clashes with what we know of the forest. Earlier books make it clear that magic here can be unpredictable. In Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid warns Harry and Ron that spells don't always work as expected under the ancient canopy. The place is thick with enchantments older than Hogwarts itself, yet Umbridge's charms function flawlessly, as if she were dueling in the Great Hall. Her confident movements and rapid casting feel more like those of a trained aura than a ministry bureaucrat who thrives on paperwork and intimidation. It raises the question, where did she learn such field-ready magic? Throughout the story, Umbridge relies on her authority, not her wand. She hides behind decrees and the weight of the ministry, but in this moment she wields her magic like a veteran of combat. Either she's been hiding a dangerous talent all along, or the forest, usually a place that bends magical rules, conveniently forgets its own nature for the sake of the scene. Number 9. Letters from Sirius. Harry sits in his room at Privet Drive, rereading the latest letter from Sirius. It's barely 3 lines long. "Stay inside, keep your head down, don't write too much." That's it. No news, no comfort, just clipped instructions that feel colder than the man Harry risked so much to save. He folds it slowly, frustration simmering. It's a sharp contrast to the year before. In Goblet of Fire, Sirius had been on the run, hiding in the mountains and living on rats, yet he still found ways to write detailed letters. He warned Harry about Karkaroff. He explained the history of Barty Crouch. "Don't go looking for trouble, Harry," he had said then, and the words had been part caution, part fatherly concern. Now, in the safety of number 12, Grimmauld Place, he seems to have nothing to say. The irony is hard to ignore. Under a roof protected by the Fidelius charm, Sirius is safer than he has been in years. The house has owls, parchment, and time, all the things he lacked before. If anything, he should be filling pages, telling Harry about the Order's movements, giving him advice, or simply making him feel less alone. Instead, the letters come rarely, and when they do, they're like scraps tossed to a starving man. It makes Harry question more than Sirius's mood. Is someone censoring his letters? Has Dumbledore told him to keep contact minimal? Or is it simply that Sirius, trapped and restless, finds writing too painful a reminder of the life he can't live? Whatever the truth, the silence between them grows heavier with each short note, leaving Harry to fill the gaps with his own restless thoughts. Number 10. The portrait of Sirius's mother. The hallway at 12 Grimold Place shuddered with noise. Tonks clipped the troll-leg umbrella stand, stumbled, and the moth-eaten curtains flew apart. Walburga Black's portrait exploded into fury. "Filth! Blood traders! Mud bloods!" she shrieked, her painted throat straining. Sirius and Remus crashed forward, dragging the curtains shut while Molly hissed, "Close the curtains!" The house fell quiet by inches, like a door easing against a gale. That scene repeats all summer. Any clatter, any dropped plate, and the portrait howls again. What jars is the company in this house? Alastair Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Remus Lupin, Molly and Arthur Weasley, even Albus Dumbledore comes and goes. If 5th years can master a silencing charm in Flitwick's class, Silencio, wands poised over croaking toads, why can't a roomful of experts mute one square of canvas? The noise isn't just comic relief, it's a liability in a safe house. Sirius offers an explanation. "She stuck it there with a permanent sticking charm," he says, jaw tight. "The canvas won't budge, fire would only scorch the wall." "Fine, but a sticking charm keeps a portrait in place. It doesn't explain why sound-dampening spells fail. The Order can seal a kitchen with an imperturbable charm. They can ward a front door against intruders, yet they cannot wrap a few feet of hallway in quiet." Maybe the answer is old black magic. Maybe Walburga's portrait is woven into the house's wards, ancient and spiteful, resisting modern charms. It's a neat in-world patch. Still the image lingers, Moody scowling, Lupin exhausted, Molly rubbing her temples, while the portrait screams and the curtains flap. In a house full of first-rate witches and wizards, the simplest fix, silence, remains stubbornly out of reach. Number 11, Hermione's Owl. Crookshanks sat on the edge of the common room table, his bottle-brush tail flicking with irritation. Hermione leaned over him, tying a small rolled parchment to a string. "Take this to Sirius," she whispered, as though the ginger cat could understand every word. The scene passed quickly, almost casually, but it carried a strange implication. Crookshanks wasn't an owl. He had never been shown delivering mail before. And yet in that moment he was treated as if a trip to a secret contact was as natural for him as chasing gnomes in the garden. In the wizarding world, letters didn't just get dropped in a mailbox. They were carried by owls, each bird trained to find its recipient, no matter how far away. Even Ron's clumsy Errol could manage it given enough time. Cats, magical or not, simply weren't part of that system. The only magical creature we've seen carrying messages without wings was a Patronus, and that was advanced magic beyond most adult wizards. So how exactly was Crookshanks supposed to deliver Hermione's letter? No explanation, no spell, just a scene that quietly rewrote the rules. It's worth remembering that in Prisoner of Azkaban, Crookshanks had been clever enough to deliver information to Sirius Black through the Shrieking Shack. But even then, it wasn't through long-distance mail delivery. He physically brought messages while moving around the grounds. Here, the implication is that he can track down Sirius across an unknown distance. "He'll get it there," Hermione says confidently, as though her pet had suddenly developed the magical GPS of a seasoned post owl. The question lingers long after the scene passes. Was Crookshanks meant to carry the letter himself? Did Hermione give it to him only to pass along to an owl later? Or did the author simply slip in a moment that assumed the reader wouldn't notice the logistical gap? In a story where even broomsticks have strict rules for use, a cat suddenly doubling as the Hogwarts Express for letters feels oddly out of place. Number 12. Hogwarts and broomsticks. The winter air in the courtyard bit at their faces, but Harry didn't care. Beside him, Fred and George swung a leg over their brooms, grinning like rebels about to make a scene. With one sharp kick, they rose into the sky. The students below gasped. It wasn't Quidditch practice. It wasn't even near the pitch. They were hovering right there, in full view of the castle windows, sending a clear message: "We stand with Hagrid." The rule was simple: no flying outside of scheduled practice or matches. Madam Hooch had made it clear back in first year. "One more stunt like that and you'll be off this team and out of the school," she had shouted at Harry after his first unsanctioned dive. Yet now 3 Gryffindors floated above the stone courtyard, and no one but Dolores Umbridge moved to stop them. Where was Hooch now? Where was McGonagall, who had once been quick to enforce discipline? Umbridge stormed out, her face twisted in fury, but she was alone in her outrage. "Get down this instant!" she shrieked. Fred only smirked and spun his broom in a lazy circle. George winked at the crowd. Harry tightened his grip, expecting at any moment to see other professors appear. None did. Windows were full of watching faces, students and staff alike, but no one else lifted a finger. The scene played out like an unspoken rebellion under a sky too cold for comfort. It was more than just teenage defiance. It was a breach of the very rules Hogwarts claimed to stand by. If flying restrictions could be ignored so easily, what else was negotiable? The moment left a strange aftertaste. The school that had once enforced discipline with iron precision now turned a blind eye as long as the act didn't openly challenge the right authority. And in that winter courtyard, 3 brooms cut through the air like lines of protest, inked against the stone walls of Hogwarts, number 13, Snape's Legilimens spell. Severus. Snape stood in the dimly lit classroom, wand in hand. "Legilimens!" The word came without warning. One moment Harry was staring at his teacher, and the next his mind was ripped open. Flashes of Aunt Marge floating toward the ceiling, the shrill voice of Aunt Petunia, the green light of a killing curse, all swirled before him in a dizzying rush. This was no gentle lesson. It was an attack, sudden and invasive, leaving Harry gasping for breath. In the wizarding world, the use of legilimency without consent was no trivial matter. The ministry considered it a dangerous intrusion, a violation of personal freedom. It was whispered in the same breath as the unforgivable curses. Even Alastair Moody, with his long history of interrogations, never used it lightly. Yet here was Snape, not an aura, but a schoolteacher, forcing his way into the mind of a 15-year-old student. No permission, no warning, no witnesses to object. Harry staggered, fury rising. "You didn't even give me a chance," he shouted. But Snape's expression was cold, unreadable. "The Dark Lord will not give you a chance," he said, his voice like ice. This exchange might sound harsh, but it also revealed something troubling. Snape's belief that the end justified the means. In his mind, the danger was real enough to break the rules. The question was whether the rules should be so easily broken in a place like Hogwarts. What made it stranger was the silence that followed. Dumbledore knew the lessons were happening. Other staff members surely noticed Harry's shaken state after each session. Yet no one stepped in. No one reminded Snape that barging into a student's mind without consent was more than bad teaching. It was, by most laws, a punishable crime. In the quiet corridors of the castle, it seemed some rules could be bent if the one breaking them wore the right face. Number 14. Lupin's behaviour. Miss Lupin in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix presents one of the more puzzling inconsistencies in J.K. Rowling's character development. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he is depicted as a man of quiet integrity and moral backbone, someone willing to step forward for Harry, even when it puts him at personal risk. Yet by the 5th book, when Harry is relentlessly persecuted by Dolores Umbridge and her regime, Lupin's voice is strangely absent. The Lupin we saw teaching Harry the Patronus charm, patiently guiding him through nightmares and Dementor attacks, would never have stood idle while such a calculated campaign of humiliation unfolded. And yet, in the pages of Order of the Phoenix, that is exactly what seems to happen. It is not that Lupin has suddenly become indifferent. Rowling never suggests that, but the narrative offers little explanation for his silence, creating a dissonance between his earlier convictions and his later actions. The contrast becomes starker when one recalls the events of Prisoner of Azkaban. In that book, Lupin is not just Harry's teacher, he becomes a figure of trust, the first defense against the dark arts professor who treats Harry with genuine respect. He confronts Severus Snape over unfair treatment, encourages Harry to develop advanced defensive skills, and even risks his job to speak truthfully about James Potter's flaws and virtues. He is depicted as someone deeply protective of his students. In Order of the Phoenix, however, when Harry's life at Hogwarts turns into a slow-motion disaster under Umbridge's reign, Lupin's presence in the Order seems strangely peripheral. It's as if the man who once stood between Harry and injustice has become a distant observer. This detachment is all the more baffling, given that Lupin is well aware of Umbridge's character. By the time of the 5th book, he is a seasoned member of the Order of the Phoenix, privy to Dumbledore's worries and aware of the Ministry's smear campaign against Harry. He knows the stakes, and he knows how fragile a 15-year-old's morale can be when isolated and disbelieved. The book even makes it clear that Lupin is concerned. In Chapter 5, The Order of the Phoenix, he greets Harry warmly and expresses sympathy for what he's endured over the summer. But once the school year begins, Lupin fades into the background, leaving Harry to fend for himself in a political and emotional minefield. One of the more telling moments comes when Harry is punished by Umbridge with her notorious blood quill. The text describes Harry returning from detention with his hand cut open, the words, "I must not tell lies," carved into his skin. Hermione and Ron are horrified, but this information never seems to reach Lupin. Given the strength of the Order's network and the fact that Sirius quickly learns of the abuse, it stretches plausibility that Lupin remains uninformed. If he does know, his lack of visible reaction is deeply out of character. The man who once opposed Snape's bias should logically be appalled by outright physical harm to a student. It is also important to remember that Lupin is not bound by the same constraints as the Hogwarts staff. Unlike McGonagall or Flitwick, he is not under Umbridge's direct authority. As a free agent of the Order, he could have communicated his concerns to Dumbledore more forcefully, pressed for intervention, or at the very least been a consistent source of emotional support for Harry. But Rowling's narrative keeps him largely at a remove, relegated to occasional mentions during Order meetings or conversations at Grimmauld Place. This creates the impression that Lupin's role is more symbolic than active, which undercuts the strong personal loyalty he displayed in the 3rd book. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin's defining trait is his empathy. He sees Harry's pain and responds with concrete action, teaching him to conjure a Patronus, offering mentorship, and validating his feelings about his parents. His absence in Order of the Phoenix during Harry's most isolating year seems like a missed narrative opportunity. This is the same Harry who, in the 3rd book, Lupin told, "Your parents gave their lives to keep you alive, Harry. A poor repayment it would be to let yourself be destroyed when you have such a chance to be happy." These words ring hollow in the 5th book, when the threat to Harry is not physical death but emotional erosion under sustained abuse, and Lupin does nothing visible to counteract it. The explanation some readers propose is that Lupin's responsibilities within the Order keep him occupied elsewhere. He is tasked with liaising with the werewolf community, an essential mission given Voldemort's recruitment of marginalized groups. While this may be true in-universe, Rowling never explores it in a way that justifies his near-complete disengagement from Harry's plight. The result is a character who, for much of the book, exists in the margins, appearing only when the plot requires a reminder that the Order still operates beyond Hogwarts' walls. Another inconsistency arises when comparing Lupin's behavior to that of Sirius Black. Sirius, despite his recklessness, takes an active interest in Harry's struggles with Umbridge, even risking exposure to send him moral support. If Sirius, trapped in Grimmauld Place and under Ministry surveillance, can find ways to reach out, why not Lupin? The lack of letters, visits, or even second-hand reassurances from him makes his earlier bond with Harry feel strangely fragile in retrospect. There is also the matter of Lupin's moral courage. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he resigns from Hogwarts rather than allow his condition to become a source of danger or scandal. It is a decision rooted in integrity, even if it causes him personal loss. In Order of the Phoenix, however, this moral decisiveness seems muted. He accepts the political climate's hostility toward Harry without public challenge, leaving the defense of truth mostly to Dumbledore and a few others. The discrepancy between these two portrayals suggests either an unspoken change in Lupin's character or a lapse in Rowling's consistency. Number 15, Chang's Patronus. When the members of Dumbledore's army gathered in the room of requirement for another training session, the air was thick with expectation. Harry Potter, standing at the front, was explaining the intricacies of the Patronus charm. Most of them knew the basics, expecto patronum, and the idea of a happy memory. But few understood the sheer difficulty of the spell. It wasn't a simple defense charm one learned in a week. A corporeal Patronus required extraordinary magical control, emotional focus, and a level of maturity that even many seasoned wizards struggled to reach. Harry himself had needed weeks of intensive training with Remus Lupin just to produce a silvery shield, and even then his stag had not been perfect at first. Yet, in this scene, Chang raises her wand, focuses for a few moments, and out emerges a fully formed, graceful swan Patronus, shimmering, solid, and beautiful, as if she had been casting it for years. It is a striking image. Rowling even describes it in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix with simple clarity. A silvery swan glided from the tip of Cho's wand and circled the room before vanishing. There is no hesitation in the description, no suggestion of effort, no signs of the partial, wispy shapes that are common for beginners. Cho, a 17-year-old student with no known combat experience beyond ordinary Hogwarts lessons, performs one of the most advanced defensive spells in the magical world without the trial and error struggle that makes Harry's own success so satisfying. The moment, while beautiful, raises a question that nags at attentive readers. Is this a believable display of magical skill, or is it a narrative convenience inserted to give Cho a graceful, impressive entrance into the DA? To understand the peculiarity, it's important to recall just how rare a corporeal Patronus is, the practical defensive magic and its use. Against the Dark Arts Handbook mentioned in The Prisoner of Azkaban places the Patronus charm among the most advanced non-verbal defenses. The Ministry even regards it as a mark of exceptional ability. Most adult wizards cannot produce one at all, and those who can often fail under pressure. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, even trained aurors like Kingsley Shacklebolt relied on more conventional spells for combat. Lupin once told Harry that producing a corporeal Patronus was well beyond ordinary wizarding level, and that it was a spell that only a few wizards can do. Given this established law, Cho's effortless swan feels like it bypasses the difficulty Rowling herself set earlier in the series. Harry's journey with the Patronus charm in The Prisoner of Azkaban is a prime example of how hard-earned this skill is supposed to be. His first attempts were complete failures, resulting in nothing more than a faint mist. He had to endure Dementor simulations over and over, each time reliving his worst memories. The eventual breakthrough, a strong stag bursting from his wand, was a triumphant payoff to pages of frustration and emotional exhaustion. By contrast, Cho's swan appears without a training montage, without visible hardship, and without any suggestion in prior books that she had been preparing for such a spell in her free time. It's a cinematic flourish that skips the narrative groundwork. One might argue that Cho, being a year older, simply has a higher skill level. She is in Ravenclaw, a house known for academic excellence, and she is a talented seeker for the Ravenclaw Quidditch team. Intelligence and reflexes, however, do not automatically translate to mastery of one of the most emotionally demanding spells in the wizarding world. The Patronus is not about book smarts or quick-flying maneuvers. It is about emotional strength and a precise blend of magical theory and self-control. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, had to work hard to produce hers, and even she only managed a small otter in her early attempts. The idea that Cho could leap straight to perfection undermines the difficulty that Rowling built into the spell's lore. Looking deeper, there is also the matter of emotional state. At this point in the story, Cho is still grieving the death of Cedric Diggory. The trauma is fresh. The memory of the graveyard scene, Voldemort's return, and Cedric's lifeless body is surely haunting her. Dementors, as Lupin explained, force a person to relive their worst memories. For someone in Cho's position, that would be devastating. Harry himself, who had years of painful memories, nearly collapsed during his first real encounter with Dementors. It stands to reason that Cho, with a brand new trauma, might struggle even more, and yet, when given the opportunity to practice against simulated Dementors, she conjures a perfect swan without visible strain. The contrast is jarring. Some readers try to rationalize this by suggesting that Cho had learned the spell earlier, perhaps from Cedric himself, or from a professor who took special interest in her. But no such hints are given in the text. Cedric never demonstrated a Patronus in the Triwizard Tournament, and there's no record of him practicing it openly. If Cho had such training, Rowling missed an opportunity to plant that detail earlier in the series. Without it, the moment feels disconnected from the internal logic of the magical world she so carefully constructed elsewhere. The convenience of the scene becomes even more apparent when considering its dramatic purpose. In Order of the Phoenix, Cho's role in the DA serves both as a potential love interest for Harry and as a participant who adds tension to the group dynamics. Giving her a beautiful swan Patronus may have been a deliberate choice to make her stand out, an image of grace that mirrors her physical beauty and appeals to Harry's romantic attraction. The swan itself, symbolizing elegance and loyalty, reinforces these themes, but in doing so, Rowling risks sacrificing internal consistency for aesthetic effect. Number 16, Muggles and the Strange Weather. The summer described at the beginning of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is unlike any other in the series. Britain seems trapped in a restless, unpredictable cycle of weather, swinging violently from heavy downpours to stifling heat, from thick fog to piercing sunlight within the span of a single day. J.K. Rowling paints these opening scenes with vivid strokes, almost daring the reader to suspect that something unnatural is afoot. The narrative makes it clear this erratic climate is not merely the result of an unlucky season, but rather the direct consequence of heightened magical activity, especially the sinister influence of Dementors and the brewing forces of Lord Voldemort's return. Yet while the book subtly connects these changes to the war stirring in the shadows, it leaves an uncomfortable gap, one that becomes a glaring oversight when examined closely. The Statute of Secrecy, first established in 1692, is one of the cornerstones of wizarding law. It demands that magical folk conceal their existence from Muggles at all costs. Previous books show the Ministry of Magic treating any breach with ferocious seriousness. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Arthur Weasley is fined for an enchanted car that risks Muggle exposure. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Sr. sends obliviators to manage the fallout from the dark mark appearing in the sky. The Ministry has an entire department dedicated to preventing magical traces from reaching Muggle notice. And yet in Order of the Phoenix we see Britain's skies behaving in ways so strange that any Muggle meteorologist would find them alarming, and the Ministry appears not to care. Rowling even hints at how abnormal this weather is to the Muggle world. The book notes that, in the past week, Muggle news reports had been full of nothing but the unseasonable cold, the persistent fogs and the torrential rains that had replaced the usual summer warmth. This is not background noise, it is a national talking point in the non-magical population. For a society so meticulous about secrecy, such an obvious clue to magical interference would be catastrophic. Muggles do not need to see a wand or a Patronus to suspect something strange. They simply need a repeated pattern of the impossible. If an entire nation's summer has become an unpredictable cauldron of extremes, the Ministry's complacency feels like a direct contradiction to its own laws. The culprit behind much of this disturbance is no mystery. Dementors, creatures that suck joy and hope from the air, are known to cause immediate temperature drops and a general sense of despair in their vicinity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, even a handful of Dementors at a Quidditch match create freezing winds and icy breath. Now, in Order of the Phoenix, these creatures are not only on the loose, but are being moved and deployed in ways that break previous Ministry control. Their influence on weather is no small matter. If just 2 Dementors could alter the climate at Hogwarts, what could hundreds do across the country? Yet the book never shows the Ministry taking even basic steps to conceal or explain these changes to Muggles. This omission is more striking when we recall how the Ministry reacted to far smaller breaches. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry's use of a single Patronus in little whinging inside a dark alley triggers an immediate notice from the improper use of magic office, followed by an attempted expulsion. The contradiction is absurd. If a lone teenager casting a defensive charm in an isolated spot can warrant bureaucratic chaos, why does nationwide weather manipulation not merit even a public cover story? The statute of secrecy is not a suggestion. It is the law that defines the wizarding world's coexistence with Muggles. Either the Ministry is shockingly negligent, or Rowling overlooked the logical consequences of her own setup. Some might argue that Muggles would simply attribute this erratic summer to climate anomalies, but Order of the Phoenix takes place in the mid-1990s, long before climate change entered mainstream British discourse as an everyday explanation for bizarre weather patterns. Meteorological technology in the 1990s was advanced enough to detect patterns but still reliant on human interpretation. If such sharp shifts from heat to flooding and back again occurred, newspapers, scientists, and local governments would be clamoring for answers. The wizarding government's history shows they are quick to intervene in Muggle matters when risk is high: memory modification squads, false media explanations, and even staged disasters. Why then is there no mention of any effort here? The narrative even hints that ordinary Muggles are beginning to notice the discomfort and unease such weather brings, though they cannot explain it. In a passage from the opening chapter, Rowling writes, "The hot sun glared down on Little Whinging, making the asphalt shimmer, yet the following day saw grey skies and sheets of rain that flooded the gutters." This kind of dramatic reversal would be headline news in any suburban community. For Harry, the change is merely another sign of magical unrest. For a Muggle neighbour, it would be cause for conversation, worry, and perhaps even local conspiracy theories. And in a world where the Ministry polices enchanted teapots, ignoring an entire nation's suspicion makes no sense. It becomes especially jarring when we remember that Cornelius Fudge, still Minister for Magic at this point, is obsessed with controlling public perception both in the wizarding and Muggle worlds. Fudge fears panic. He downplays Voldemort's return because he believes the truth will cause widespread chaos. But wouldn't allowing Muggles to experience extreme magical side effects be an even greater threat to stability? One Dementor attack on Harry results in a Ministry summons, yet an entire season of Dementor-fueled climate shifts merits no official intervention in the text. This imbalance undercuts the internal logic of the story. Number 17. Neville's memory. When the 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, reaches the chapter in which the Dumbledore's army members sit in the room of requirement and talk about past Death Eater attacks, a sudden revelation shakes the scene. Neville Longbottom, usually shy and hesitant, suddenly discloses that his parents, Alice and Frank Longbottom, were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and her fellow Death Eaters. He speaks in a way that suggests he has known this truth for a long time, detailing the crime with a quiet but unflinching clarity. The reader cannot miss the moment, and it is raw, emotional, and for Neville, transformative. Yet the problem lies not in the emotional weight of the scene, but in its logic within the continuity of the series. Up to this point, Rowling had kept Neville's past shrouded in vagueness, hinting at his family's tragedy, but never allowing him to display such precise knowledge. The moment feels almost as if Neville's memory, or perhaps Rowling's planning, has suddenly shifted, granting him access to details he logically shouldn't have known without earlier explanation. In earlier books, Neville's references to his parents were sparse, awkward, and almost evasive. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, during the hospital scene at St. Mungo's, the reader sees Neville's reaction when Harry and company encounter Alice Longbottom. She cannot speak coherently. She offers Neville a Drubal's best blowing gum wrapper, which he pockets without a word. His grandmother Augusta briskly explains that his parents are in the long-term ward and leaves it at that. At no point in the earlier books does Neville display the emotional or factual certainty about their attackers that he suddenly has in Order of the Phoenix. The implication had always been that Neville either did not know the full story or that he was too young when it happened to retain any memory of it. The torture of the Longbottoms by Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus Lestrange, Rabastan Lestrange, and Barty Crouch Jr. occurred shortly after Voldemort's fall in 1981. Neville was an infant at the time, barely more than a year old. There is no way he could have remembered the attack firsthand. Thus, his knowledge could only have come from adults. Most likely Augusta Longbottom, or perhaps teachers like Dumbledore who had reason to know the details. Yet the fifth book offers no indication that anyone had recently sat him down to tell him the full truth. In fact, the way Augusta interacts with Neville in previous appearances suggests she avoids speaking about it at all, preferring to dwell on her disappointment in him rather than offering emotional explanations. This creates a narrative gap. If Augusta had told Neville the full details long ago, why does he act in earlier books as though the matter is too sensitive to approach? Why does he show no sign of recognizing Bellatrix Lestrange's name until Order of the Phoenix? The moment he recounts the attack to Harry, Hermione, and the others, he describes it with a subdued calm that belies its horror. This isn't a child piecing together fragments of overheard conversations. This is someone who has been told the whole account in explicit terms. For readers who paid close attention in earlier books, the question emerges, when did this knowledge come to him, and why did Rowling never hint at that shift? Consider how Rowling frames Neville's revelation in the fifth book. The quote reads, "Bellatrix Lestrange tortured them into insanity. They're in St. Mungo's. I visit them, but they don't recognize me." The brevity of the statement, coupled with the absolute certainty in his words, feels almost rehearsed, as if it is a truth he has carried for years but never voiced. But this contradicts his hesitant, embarrassed demeanor in Goblet of Fire, where he hides the St. Mungo's wrapper quickly and refuses to discuss it. If he already knew Bellatrix's name, why would he not react when her escape from Azkaban is reported earlier in Order of the Phoenix? The narrative suggests that the reader should accept his sudden knowledge without questioning when and how he acquired it. This leads to the suspicion that the detail about Neville's knowledge of Bellatrix and the circumstances of his parents' fate may have been added for dramatic impact in the fifth book, without Rowling carefully retrofitting the earlier installments. In the earlier narrative, Neville's tragedy serves as a quiet background detail, adding depth to his awkward character. In the fifth book, however, his parents' story becomes a significant emotional anchor, fueling his determination to fight. This is effective in building his arc, and Neville evolves from a bumbling classmate into someone driven by personal loss. But it strains the continuity when viewed alongside the earlier portrayal of his ignorance in. The reader might imagine possible explanations. Perhaps Augusta had told Neville everything between the events of Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix, especially after the rise in Death Eater activity. Perhaps the Ministry's announcement of mass Azkaban escapes prompted a candid conversation, yet Rowling never includes such a moment in the text, For a series that often lingers on character backstories and emotional revelations, this absence is conspicuous. A single scene in which Neville reacts to Bellatrix's name before the Room of Requirement conversation could have bridged the gap. Without it, the transition feels abrupt, almost jarring. There is also the question of why no one from the Order of the Phoenix took the initiative to tell Neville the truth earlier. Given that the Order is full of people who fought alongside his parents, Alastor Moody, Minerva McGonagall, and even Dumbledore himself, it seems improbable that they would have collectively maintained silence for 14 years, only for Neville to suddenly speak with precise knowledge during a casual meeting of the DA. If the goal was to protect him from trauma, that motive would have been undermined by the reality that Neville was already living with the visible consequences of that trauma every time he visited St. Mungo's. Rowling's narrative choice becomes even more puzzling when one considers the thematic weight of Neville's story. His parents are among the most tragic casualties of the First War against Voldemort, not dead, but lost to a fate worse than death. This mirrors the series' recurring themes about the cost of war and the long shadows it casts on the next generation. Had the truth been revealed to Neville earlier in the series, his arc could have been enriched with more gradual development, showing him processing the knowledge over time. Instead, the reader is asked to accept that Neville suddenly wields this knowledge as part of his identity without having witnessed the moment of revelation. A notable consequence of this narrative jump is the way it retroactively changes how we interpret Neville's earlier behavior. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when he is humiliated for losing the passwords to Gryffindor Tower, his embarrassment seems rooted in his general clumsiness and self-doubt. Knowing in Order of the Phoenix that he carries the weight of his parents' fate gives these moments a different shade, but only if the reader assumes he has always known. If he did not know then, the earlier portrayal is consistent, but if he did, his lack of visible reaction to related events, such as hearing about Death Eaters in the Triwizard Tournament year, becomes harder to reconcile. One could argue that Rowling intended Neville's silence to be a defense mechanism, that he avoided speaking about his parents' fate to spare himself from pity or discomfort. But the text gives little to support this interpretation before Order of the Phoenix. On the contrary, earlier depictions of Neville suggest he is largely defined by external perceptions. The boy who can't do anything right, rather than by a deep internal struggle with a known family tragedy. When the truth finally emerges, it reframes him instantly, as though a hidden well of strength has always been there, unseen. Dramatically, this works. Logically, it leaves questions. The case of Neville's memory and knowledge about his parents exemplifies a broader challenge in long-running series, maintaining continuity while allowing characters to grow in ways that serve the immediate story. The sudden depth given to Neville in Order of the Phoenix serves the emotional arc of the fifth book brilliantly, especially when he later faces Bellatrix in the Department of Mysteries. The confrontation gains enormous power from the personal stakes. Yet without prior hints, the revelation risks feeling like a retroactive character adjustment, a moment where the author decides that Neville needs this drive now, even if it requires bending the internal logic of earlier books. The reader's suspension of disbelief is usually strong in a world of magic, prophecy, and enchanted creatures, but it can be tested by inconsistencies in character knowledge, especially when tied to events as significant as the torture of one's parents. Neville's case invites the attentive reader to wonder whether Rowling had fully plotted his arc from the beginning, or whether it evolved mid-series, with necessary backstory inserted as needed. The power of the fifth book's scene remains undeniable, yet its believability depends on accepting an unseen conversation or a change in authorial intent that the text never directly acknowledges. Number 18. The disappearance of Mundungus Fletcher. Mundungus Fletcher's arc in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is one of those curious details that, once noticed, leaves a reader unsettled. He enters the narrative early with an unmistakable presence, scruffy, untrustworthy, yet undeniably connected to the shadowy network of the Order of the Phoenix. Rowling describes him vividly when Harry first sees him again. A squat man in a battered moleskin overcoat stood smoking a pipe. His unshaven face was almost completely hidden behind a mess of ginger hair. Fletcher isn't just background colour, he's one of the few members tasked with the critical job of keeping watch on Privet Drive during Harry's summer. This is no small responsibility. The Order had to ensure that Voldemort's followers didn't make a move on Harry before the school year began. Mundungus, despite his questionable reliability, was trusted with it. The decision to place him there gave him immediate narrative weight. The middle section of the book gives him even more significance. Mundungus provides Harry with key scraps of intelligence about Death Eater activity, particularly through overheard conversations and shady contacts in the wizarding underworld. It's not polished information. Fletcher's words are always laced with a kind of vagueness. But it serves to reinforce that he is in the thick of things. There's a particular moment, after an Order meeting, where it's revealed that he'd overheard a couple of Death Eaters talking in the Hog's Head about trying to get hold of a weapon. This small revelation sets a tone of urgency. The weapon is not yet revealed to the reader, but the hint is part of the chain of clues leading to the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries. Rowling uses Mundungus here almost like a plot lever. He nudges the story in a certain direction without stepping too far into the spotlight. And then he's gone. His disappearance from the latter part of the novel is striking because the stakes escalate and nearly every Order member of consequence either takes part in the climactic events or is at least accounted for. The Department of Mysteries battle pulls in figures like Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Nymphadora Tonks, and even Mad-Eye Moody in the build-up. Yet Mundungus, who had been actively engaged in surveillance and information gathering, is simply absent. Not a line explains his whereabouts. It's as if he has been erased from the board without ceremony. In a novel where even minor characters like Sturgis Podmore get narrative closure, Podmore's arrest is mentioned and impacts security, Fletcher is left hanging in narrative limbo. What makes this omission more glaring is that the setup practically demanded his inclusion. He was one of the few stationed near the Dursleys' home. He had first-hand knowledge of the kind of vigilance the Order maintained around Harry. When the attack on Sirius's home base, 12 Grimmauld Place, is hinted at by Voldemort's manipulations of Harry's mind, the Order scrambles to respond. Here, Fletcher's absence is more than just a missing body, it's a missing perspective. A streetwise, opportunistic character like him might have spotted suspicious movement, might have been a reluctant witness to the build-up of the final confrontation. Even if Rowling wanted to keep the focus on the central heroes, a passing remark about Mundungus being injured, distracted, or called away could have tied off his thread. Instead, the trail just stops. This is the same character who, at the start, was caught leaving his post because he had to see to some business, a phrase that infuriates Moody and raises questions about his priorities. Rowling could have easily mirrored this in the climax. Perhaps he was absent again, or perhaps his business put him in danger. But without that, readers are left with a vacuum in the rules. Of good storytelling, the Chekhov's gun principle suggests that when you introduce a figure with significant potential for conflict or aid, that figure's trajectory should have a payoff. Fletcher's vanishing act breaks that rhythm. Part of the frustration comes from knowing how the Order operates during the series. They are a small, tight-knit group, and in Order of the Phoenix especially, every member is valuable. Rowling makes a point of showing us how even peripheral members, like Hestia Jones or Emmeline Vance, are brought into assignments. Mundungus, with his underworld ties, could have served as a crucial informant in the run-up to the Ministry battle. Imagine if he'd stumbled across chatter about Lucius Malfoy's planned appearance in the Department of Mysteries. His omission not only weakens his personal arc, but also slightly dulls the web of tension leading to the climax. There's also the matter of tone. Fletcher is a comic relief figure in his earliest appearances, but Rowling subtly threads him with menace and unreliability. He is the type who could betray, delay, or mislead, intentionally or by accident, and thus raise the stakes. His unpredictability is a storytelling asset, yet in the final act, that asset is inexplicably shelved. The absence feels like a missed opportunity to either deepen the tension by showing him fail at a critical moment or redeem him through an unexpected act of courage. When readers revisit the text looking for any late mention, the silence is absolute. The battle in the Department of Mysteries is recounted in rapid, chaotic detail. Harry duels Dolohov, Neville suffers a broken nose, Luna is knocked unconscious, Tonks falls and is dragged to safety, Sirius falls through the veil. In the aftermath, the Order regroups, Dumbledore speaks, and Harry grieves, but Fletcher's name never surfaces. For a character who had been active and visible earlier in the same book, this absence is jarring. It reads less like an intentional narrative choice and more like an editing oversight. A loose thread left dangling in an otherwise tightly woven climax. One might argue that Rowling kept him away to maintain focus on the central emotional core of the finale, Harry's loss of Sirius. Yet other peripheral figures are present without derailing that emotional impact. Kingsley Shacklebolt is there, dueling flawlessly. Mad-Eye's distinctive commands are heard over the din. Even Tonks, whose role in the climax is small, appears just enough to later tie into the wider series arc. Fletcher's complete absence cuts against that pattern and makes his earlier involvement feel almost irrelevant. This is not the first time Rowling sidelines a character for convenience, but here the effect is amplified because of the book's length and complexity. Order of the Phoenix is the longest novel in the series, sprawling with subplots, from Harry's detentions with Umbridge to Dumbledore's army training sessions. Within this web, a character who starts with active duties and shares critical intelligence tends to be remembered. When that character vanishes, it stands out in the reader's mind during a reread, and even more so when one tries to piece together the Order's overall strategy. It's also worth noting that Fletcher's absence creates a slight logical gap in the protection detail around Harry. The Order had a system of watchers, and Fletcher's position was not easily replaceable, given his familiarity with Muggle neighborhoods and his ability to blend in. If he were unavailable during a crucial moment, the text might have acknowledged that shift. Without that, it's almost as though his duties evaporated without consequence, which feels inconsistent with the meticulous way Rowling normally tracks the movements of Order members. Looking ahead to Half-Blood Prince, Fletcher reappears with his usual shady charm, even taking part in significant scenes, such as when he sells Black family heirlooms and provokes Mrs. Weasley's outrage. This makes his absence in Order of the Phoenix's finale all the more perplexing. The character clearly remained in Rowling's plans. He wasn't written out or forgotten entirely. Which raises the question, why the gap? The likeliest answer is that in the drafting process, his role in the climax was trimmed or removed, perhaps for pacing or to streamline the scene. But without a textual trace of his fate during those events, the cut leaves behind a sense of incompleteness. The disappearance of Mundungus Fletcher from the climax isn't just a nitpick for detail-oriented readers. It's emblematic of how secondary characters in sprawling narratives can sometimes slip through the cracks, even in otherwise carefully plotted works. Fletcher's arc in Order of the Phoenix begins with promise, builds toward importance, and then falls into silence. It's an omission that doesn't break the book, but does create a ripple of dissonance for those paying attention. Rowling's skill in characterization is such that even a disreputable, self-serving figure like Mundungus earns a place in the reader's mental cast list, and when that place is abruptly empty, it's impossible not to notice. In the end, Fletcher's vanishing act feels almost like one of his own schemes, sudden, unexplained, and leaving others to clean up the mess. The difference is that this time it's not Moody or Mrs. Weasley fuming at his absence. It's the reader wondering where he went when the Order needed every wand it could muster. Number 19. Filch's panic. Filch had seen chaos before. For decades, the caretaker of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry had trudged along the stone corridors with his mop and bucket, a permanent scowl etched into his face. He had endured the relentless mischief of students from generations past, tolerated Peeves, the poltergeist turning lessons into bedlam, and survived prank after prank that would have sent any ordinary man into retirement. Yet, in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there is a moment where Argus Filch's reaction seems strangely out of proportion. Fred and George Weasley set off their infamous fireworks, a stunning display of magical mayhem that leaves professors gaping and students roaring with laughter. But Filch, who had lived through far worse, is described as running around in complete panic, as though the school itself were under siege. This sudden fear, given his long history of surviving Hogwarts madness, reads almost like a break in character, a rare lapse in J.K. Rowling's otherwise meticulous continuity. The fireworks themselves were, by all accounts, spectacular. Rowling describes them in vivid detail. Sparks showered from every burning end, whizzing rockets ricocheted off the walls, and dragons made of fire soared through the air. They were magical creations of the Weasley twins, designed to wreak maximum disruption. They roared, exploded, and filled the castle with dazzling patterns and ear-splitting booms. But to believe that this would be the thing to push Filch into a frenzy is curious. After all, this is the same man who, in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, calmly dealt with a flood of mucus-filled balloons Peeves had dropped from the ceiling. This is the same caretaker who once endured what Peeves proudly called the Great Dung Bomb Blitz of '87, when several corridors became so foul-smelling they had to be magically quarantined for a week. None of these incidents saw Filch described as panicked, annoyed, yes, furious, certainly, but not fearful. The oddity becomes clearer when recalling Filch's resilience during Peeves' most dangerous tricks. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Peeves drops an entire blackboard on Filch's head, then unleashes chalk dust so thick that students can barely breathe. Filch simply coughs his way through, barking threats and muttering about detention lists. He had also faced the disastrous Valentine's Day chaos in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets when dwarves dressed as cupids chased students through the halls, knocking over suits of armor and scattering parchment everywhere. Again, Filch was irritated but not overwhelmed. These examples show a man accustomed to magical pandemonium, someone hardened by years of being the lone, non-magical enforcer in a building teeming with adolescent witches and wizards. This is why the firework panic scene in Order of the Phoenix feels off. Rowling writes that Filch burst into the corridor, his eyes wide and terrified, waving his arms as though trying to swat the dragons out of the air. It is a striking image, almost slapstick, but it contradicts the image of the gruff caretaker who normally charges into messes with muttered curses rather than genuine fear. The fireworks, though impressive, were not inherently dangerous. They did not cause structural damage. They were a sensory spectacle rather than a threat. Filch, who had once chased Peeves down a staircase while dodging exploding ink bladders, would logically be irritated but not immobilized. To understand why this stands out, it helps to remember Filch's personality. He is a squib, born to magical parents but lacking magic himself. This fact has made him bitter, defensive, and obsessed with enforcing rules. He often overcompensates for his inability to perform magic by throwing himself into discipline and control. His main weapon is intimidation. He thrives on showing that he is not afraid of the chaos around him, even if, internally, he feels disadvantaged. It is this stubbornness that makes the fireworks scene puzzling. Instead of clamping down on chaos with the usual threats of expulsion and chains in the dungeons, Filch appears as a frantic bystander, flailing in helplessness. In previous books, his encounters with Peeves and mischievous students highlight his endurance. During the infamous water balloon siege on the 5th floor, Peeves pelted students with balloons filled with swamp water. The scene in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire shows Filch trudging in with a mop and a bucket, muttering, "I'll string him up by the toes if I get my hands on him." He was angry, but the narrative makes it clear he was handling the situation. No panic, no frantic gestures, just his usual simmering rage. Comparing that to the arm-waving frenzy in Order of the Phoenix makes the latter feel almost cartoonish. Even when the stakes were far higher, when Mrs. Norris, his beloved cat, was petrified by the basilisk in Chamber of Secrets, Filch's reaction, while emotionally charged, was focused. He immediately blamed Harry, shouting accusations and demanding punishment. He was devastated, yes, but still coherent enough to argue his case to Dumbledore. He was not reduced to helpless flapping and running in circles. If the sight of his cat turned to stone didn't make him lose control, why would a display of magical fireworks? One possible explanation is that Rowling wanted to heighten the comedy and chaos of the scene. The Weasley twins' fireworks are a turning point. They symbolize rebellion against Dolores Umbridge's authoritarian rule, and their mischief inspires the rest of the school. Making Filch appear overwhelmed could have been a deliberate exaggeration to emphasize their victory over authority figures. However, this choice sacrifices some continuity in his character. Filch's persona as the eternally grumpy, unflappable caretaker is part of Hogwarts' atmosphere. To see him flustered is fine. To see him terrified by a non-lethal prank stretches believability. It also undercuts the dynamic between Filch and the Weasley twins. Up to this point, there is mutual recognition of each other's persistence. Fred and George know Filch will never give up trying to catch them, and Filch knows they will never stop finding ways to evade him. Their battles are a game of cat and mouse built on years of exchanges. When Rowling has Filch reduced to swatting at fireworks like a confused first year, it diminishes that long-standing rivalry. It makes him seem like he's facing something entirely new and incomprehensible, when in truth he has faced magical chaos for decades. There's also the matter of the school's magical safeguards. Filch knows that Hogwarts enchantments protect against real harm from such magical mischief. The suits of armor that march in protest, the bewitched snow that falls indoors, the dancing skeletons during Halloween feasts, none of these have ever posed a genuine danger to students or staff. If anything, he is frustrated by his inability to counter such magic without assistance. The fireworks were a nuisance, certainly, but he would have known they could be extinguished by skilled wizards like Professor Flitwick. His role, traditionally, would be to identify culprits and mete out punishment, not to try to physically attack magical constructs with his bare hands. The narrative framing of the fireworks as an unstoppable force also conflicts with earlier depictions of magical pranks being controlled or ended. When Peeves floods the dungeons, Professor McGonagall and other staff step in to handle the spellwork. Filch is never portrayed as someone who believes such incidents are beyond remedy. He simply resents that the cleanup usually falls to him. This practical resignation makes his exaggerated fear in the fireworks scene seem inconsistent. A man used to clearing up poltergeist slime without batting an eye should not be dumbfounded by flying Catherine wheels. Some readers have suggested that perhaps Umbridge's reign had left Filch more tense and easily rattled. In Order of the Phoenix, he is her ally, relishing the extra authority she grants him, but that alliance also places him under more pressure to maintain control. The fireworks in that light are not just pranks. They are open defiance of the regime he supports. His panic could stem from the realization that he cannot enforce Umbridge's rules against such audacity. This psychological reading makes sense, but it is not supported explicitly by the text. Rowling focuses on the visual comedy rather than giving us a glimpse into Filch's internal state. There is also the question of tone. The fireworks scene is written with a kind of gleeful chaos, celebrating the twins' exit from Hogwarts in spectacular style. Everyone, students, even some staff, is swept up in the excitement. Filch's panic may have been included to contrast with the general joy, showing that only Umbridge and her loyalist caretaker are miserable. But by pushing him into a state of near bewilderment, the scene risks painting him as incompetent rather than simply outmatched. It turns him from a persistent antagonist into a hapless extra in the twins' grand finale. Looking back at his history, it is not hard to imagine a more consistent reaction. Filch could have been shown storming into the corridor, face purple with rage, shouting for students to help him catch the perpetrators and vowing revenge. He could have been furious that his precious rules were being mocked rather than frightened by the spectacle. This would have kept the comedic tone intact while preserving the character's established resilience. Instead, the text gives us a caretaker batting at sparks like an old man shooing pigeons from his porch. This inconsistency doesn't ruin the scene. Far from it. The Weasley fireworks remain one of the most beloved moments in the series. But for readers who have tracked Filch's behavior over 5 books, it stands out as a rare moment where his established toughness crumbles for no clear reason. A man who had seen corridors filled with swamp water, who had chased Peeves through collapsing staircases, who had endured decades of magical mischief without ever truly breaking, suddenly appears out of his depth. It is a small lapse, perhaps born of the need for comedic exaggeration, but it is enough to make attentive fans pause and wonder. Number 20. Arthur Weasley's Letters. Arthur Weasley has always been painted by J.K. Rowling as one of the most genuine, caring, and quietly heroic figures in the Harry Potter universe. His warmth extends not only to his own children but also to Harry, who from the moment he stepped into the burrow was treated as part of the family. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Arthur is depicted in several moments as a supportive adult in Harry's life, one who notices when something is wrong and often tries, in his understated way, to offer comfort. That is why his complete silence toward Harry during one of the most emotionally exhausting school years, especially in the form of letters, feels not only out of place but like a genuine inconsistency in the narrative. When Harry is left at Hogwarts under the constant surveillance and cruelty of Dolores Umbridge, Arthur knows the situation. He even escorts Harry to the Ministry of Magic for his disciplinary hearing, and yet after this, no comforting words or advice arrive in Harry's post. For a man of Arthur's character, this absence is baffling. Rowling's portrayal of Arthur as a man who understands emotional needs is consistent in the earlier books. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry arrives at the Burrow after being rescued from the Dursleys, Arthur welcomes him warmly, showing no judgment for the disastrous escape in the flying car. Later, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Arthur sits with Harry in the tent before the Quidditch World Cup, discussing the intricacies of Muggle artifacts, but also clearly paying attention to the boy's comfort and interest. These are the small human touches that make Arthur so endearing, a man who takes the time to engage with young people no matter how busy or distracted he might be. That is why in Order of the Phoenix, when Harry is being publicly ridiculed in the Daily Prophet, isolated from his peers and punished repeatedly by Umbridge, the lack of a single supportive letter from Arthur feels like a betrayal not by the character but by the writing. The contrast becomes starker when we remember that Arthur is actively involved in the Order of the Phoenix, an organization that exists to resist Voldemort and protect those in danger. Harry is not only a target of Voldemort but also the boy who survived the killing curse, the one whose well-being should be a priority for every member of the Order. Rowling even gives us glimpses of other members of the Order sending support in various ways. Sirius tries, despite being trapped in Grimmauld Place, to offer Harry advice and comfort. Lupin, though less frequent, is shown to have concern for Harry's state of mind. Yet Arthur, who has no such physical restriction, and who in earlier books made time for Harry despite work and family demands, is silent. This is not the silence of someone who does not care. It is the kind of absence that feels like a narrative oversight. Arthur's connection to Harry during the summer before Order of the Phoenix is especially significant. The morning of the hearing at the ministry is an intense moment. Harry is nervous, dreading not only the trial but the possibility of expulsion from Hogwarts. Arthur accompanies him, guiding him through the maze of ministry corridors and even showing kindness when others, like Fudge, treat Harry coldly. He reassures Harry before the hearing and seems to recognize the stress the boy is under. Yet after that, the reader is left with no evidence that Arthur follows up with Harry once he's back at school, despite knowing that Umbridge will have authority over him. For a man who would have gone to the ends of the earth for his children, as Rowling describes him in Goblet of Fire, it is strange that he doesn't at least send Harry a short note of encouragement. The logic for Arthur's silence becomes even weaker when considering how well Rowling had established the Weasley family's relationship with Harry through correspondence. Molly Weasley writes to him multiple times across the series, sending care packages, birthday gifts and advice. Ron and Ginny send letters as well. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Ron writes to Harry about winning the bet on the World Cup. In Goblet of Fire, Molly sends a heartfelt letter after Harry's name is drawn from the goblet. The idea that Arthur, the patriarch of this warm and letter-writing family, would not take a moment to pen his own message to Harry during the Umbridge crisis is not only odd, but inconsistent with the behaviour Rowling has already shown. In fact, Arthur has already been positioned in Order of the Phoenix as someone deeply aware of the ministry's internal politics and the danger of propaganda against Harry. He warns the family to be careful about what they say and shows an understanding of how damaging the Daily Prophet's smear campaign is to Harry's reputation. His insight into political danger is precisely why a letter from him would carry weight. It would be the advice of a man who knows the inner workings of the ministry, someone who could help Harry navigate the treacherous year ahead. Yet Rowling leaves this opportunity unused, and instead Harry spends the bulk of the school year with no adult male figure in active correspondence besides the cryptic and often problematic messages from Sirius. One might argue that the secrecy of the Order prevented Arthur from writing letters, fearing interception by the ministry. However, this theory weakens when we remember that Sirius still manages to send notes, however brief, and that Fred and George Weasley manage to communicate with Harry through gifts and messages. Furthermore, Arthur is shown to be resourceful in other parts of the series. In Chamber of Secrets, he finds creative ways to handle the problem of the flying car incident with minimal harm to his children. In Order of the Phoenix, he is aware of ways to pass information discreetly. The man who could smuggle a flying car and collect illegal Muggle artifacts surely could have found a way to send a harmless, supportive letter to Harry without incriminating himself. The absence becomes even more jarring when considering the toll Umbridge's punishments take on Harry. The "I must not tell lies" detentions physically scar his hand, and by the time Ron and Hermione discover it, Harry has already endured multiple sessions alone. Arthur, if he had known, and given the Order's intelligence network it's plausible he could have heard, would have reacted strongly. His protective nature toward his children suggests he would not have stood by silently. A brief letter expressing concern, even without details about the Order, would have been a lifeline for Harry in those moments. Instead, the novel leaves us with the impression that Arthur simply faded into the background of Harry's life until the events at the ministry later in the year. There is also a thematic loss here. Letters in the Harry Potter series are not just a plot device. They are a recurring symbol of connection in a world divided by distance and secrecy. Hagrid's letter delivering Harry's Hogwarts acceptance, the many correspondences from Sirius, the Howler from Molly. These moments show the emotional power of written words. Rowling has used letters to bridge the gap between characters separated by danger or school terms. Arthur's absence from this motif in Order of the Phoenix feels like a missed chance to deepen his role as a father figure for Harry, especially in a book that is otherwise so heavy with Harry's feelings of isolation. Arthur's personality, as crafted by Rowling, is one that thrives on quiet acts of care. He is not loud or dramatic in his displays of affection, but he is consistent. In Goblet of Fire, when Harry is wounded after the graveyard duel, Arthur is among those who rush to his side without hesitation. In Chamber of Secrets, he risks his own safety to defend Harry and Ron from Ministry accusations after the car incident. This pattern suggests that silence during a crisis is not in his nature. It is more likely that Rowling, focused on the larger political arc of the book, simply didn't give Arthur the narrative space to act in this way. The problem is, readers notice when a beloved character's defining traits are sidelined. It's worth noting that Rowling does allow Arthur moments of connection with Harry in Order of the Phoenix, but they are fleeting and mostly tied to plot necessities, such as escorting him to the Ministry or discussing events at Grimmauld Place. None of these moments, however, carry the emotional intimacy of a private letter written away from the eyes and ears of the rest of the Order. Given that Rowling often uses private communication to reveal vulnerability in her characters, Arthur's missing letters are not just a gap in realism, they are a lost opportunity for character depth. When looking back, it is easy to imagine the kind of letter Arthur might have written. It would not have been long, nor overly dramatic. It might have included a line of encouragement like, "Keep your head up, Harry. We know the truth, and we're with you," paired with a piece of practical advice about handling Ministry interference. It might have been the one voice of reason Harry could cling to when Umbridge's campaign was at its height. By omitting this, Rowling leaves readers with a small but noticeable crack in the portrait of a man otherwise so reliably compassionate. This small inconsistency doesn't undo Arthur's warmth or his role in the series, but it does highlight the way minor narrative choices can clash with established characterization. For a story that thrives on the strength of its relationships, the absence of Arthur's written support stands out. It is a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures, like a letter, can be the most telling about who a character truly is. In Arthur's case, the silence speaks louder than any words he might have written, but not in a way that aligns with the man readers had come to know. Number 21, The Prophecy and Dumbledore. When Harry Potter finally stepped into Dumbledore's office after the chaos at the Department of Mysteries, the weight of the night pressed down on him like an iron shroud. Sirius Black was dead, the prophecy was shattered, and the truth, which had been dangling just out of reach for an entire year, was finally laid bare. Dumbledore spoke in slow, deliberate tones, explaining that the prophecy Sybil Trelawney had made years ago named Harry as the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord. But as the words unfolded, it was impossible not to notice the peculiar timing. Harry had already heard part of the prophecy earlier in the year from members of the Order, and even from Voldemort's actions. Why, then, had Dumbledore chosen to hold back the rest until now, in the aftermath of such loss? In the book's final chapters, Dumbledore admits that he avoided Harry purposefully. "I cared about you too much," he says, confessing that he feared burdening Harry with more than he could handle. Yet this reasoning becomes increasingly shaky when viewed against the backdrop of the events of that year. The headmaster was fully aware that Harry felt abandoned, cut off from information, and left to stew in uncertainty. Hermione Granger repeatedly urged Harry to speak to Dumbledore, and even Ron Weasley noticed how strange it was that the headmaster never looked Harry in the eye during the start of term. This wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate act, and that deliberate choice had consequences. The prophecy itself was already partly in Harry's possession, though in fragments. Voldemort had attacked him in the graveyard because he believed Harry was the one foretold. Harry knew Voldemort marked him as his equal. He didn't need the full text to grasp that their fates were intertwined. The real difference between the partial knowledge and the complete prophecy was the final clause. Neither can live while the other survives. That one line carried the inevitability of death for either him or Voldemort. Dumbledore's delay in revealing this is not merely a storytelling choice, it raises a logical question. If Voldemort's obsession with the prophecy was already endangering Harry, what strategic benefit did Dumbledore gain by withholding it? Looking at Dumbledore's own admission makes the situation even more puzzling. He acknowledges in his calm but weary tone that he was wrong to avoid Harry. He says he feared giving Harry too much pain before it was necessary. Yet throughout the year, Harry was already in pain, ostracized at Hogwarts, vilified by the Daily Prophet, and tormented by nightmares of Voldemort's actions. By avoiding him, Dumbledore allowed those feelings of abandonment to ferment into anger and recklessness. This culminated in Harry's rash decision to rescue Sirius from the Ministry, a decision that led straight to Sirius's death. It is here that readers can't help but see the connection between silence and tragedy. Consider the irony. The entire plot of Order of the Phoenix hinges on Voldemort luring Harry to the Department of Mysteries by exploiting his ignorance. If Harry had known the full prophecy, he might have understood why Voldemort was so desperate to retrieve it. He might have questioned the vision he saw in the mirror of his mind, realizing it was a trap. Instead, he acted on impulse, convinced that Sirius was in mortal danger. Rowling crafts the scene to heighten the emotional blow, but in doing so, she inadvertently exposes the flaw in Dumbledore's logic. A headmaster who prides himself on wisdom allowed the exact scenario he feared to unfold. It becomes even harder to justify when we recall Dumbledore's own strategic brilliance in earlier books. In the Philosopher's Stone, he set a complex series of tests, knowing Harry and his friends would attempt to protect the stone. In the Chamber of Secrets, he subtly guided Harry through riddles about the basilisk. Dumbledore was never one to shy away from trusting Harry with dangerous truths when it suited his plans. So why, in this instance, did he choose avoidance over guidance? The answer, perhaps, lies in Rowling's desire to amplify the emotional payoff of the revelation, but within the story's logic, it makes Dumbledore's choice look uncharacteristically careless. One of the most striking details is Dumbledore's acknowledgement that he should have spoken sooner. "I was wrong," he admits, a rare concession from him. But the damage is already done. Harry's grief over Sirius's death is compounded by the knowledge that the truth had been within reach all along. Dumbledore claims his intention was to protect Harry from the burden of a prophecy that condemned him to either kill or be killed. However, Harry was already living under that shadow. He just didn't know its exact wording. The concealment did not spare him pain. It merely replaced one form of suffering with another, more dangerous kind. From a narrative standpoint, the delay also undermines the supposed trust between Harry and Dumbledore. Throughout the series, Rowling paints their relationship as central to Harry's journey. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Dumbledore's quiet faith in Harry's decisions leads to the rescue of Sirius and Buckbeak. In Goblet of Fire, his unwavering support after the graveyard incident solidifies Harry's resolve, yet in Order of the Phoenix, this trust collapses under the weight of secrecy. The result is not just a grieving teenager, but one who has been maneuvered into tragedy by the very person he trusted most. Adding to the strangeness is the fact that several other members of the Order knew the prophecy's contents, or at least its significance. Professor McGonagall, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Remus Lupin were privy to the fact that Voldemort was seeking something in the Department of Mysteries. They, too, avoided explaining it to Harry. The coordinated silence suggests not just a single man's choice, but an organizational decision within the Order. If the intention was to keep the prophecy safe, it backfired spectacularly. Harry was the one person who needed clarity the most, since he was both the subject and the target. The tragedy of Sirius's death becomes, in this light, a preventable outcome. Rowling herself ensures the reader sees the cause and effect chain: Harry's vision, his lack of skepticism, the rushed flight to London, the trap, the duel, and finally Bellatrix Lestrange's curse. The emotional devastation is powerful, but it leaves behind an aftertaste of frustration. If Dumbledore had told Harry in September what he told him in June, the path to that confrontation might have been altered entirely. This is not to say Sirius would have been safe forever, but the specific circumstances of his death might have been avoided. Another detail worth considering is the prophecy's fragility as a plot device. In the book, once the orb is destroyed, the prophecy is lost, except for the copy in Dumbledore's mind. This means that withholding it served no preservation purpose. Voldemort already believed it said Harry could defeat him. Destroying the physical record did not erase the truth from those who knew it. The secrecy, therefore, was not about safeguarding knowledge, but about managing Harry's emotions, a task at which Dumbledore ultimately failed. It's also revealing that Dumbledore only chooses to speak when Harry is at his most volatile. In the office, Harry smashes objects, shouts, and demands answers. Dumbledore lets him rage before delivering the prophecy as though the emotional purge is necessary to make him receptive. This is a storytelling choice that works dramatically but makes little sense strategically. Why wait until the boy is already drowning in grief to throw him a lifeline woven with thorns? The conversation also forces Harry to process not just Sirius's death, but the knowledge that his life is defined by an inevitable duel to the death. It is a crushing double blow. Dumbledore's claim that he wanted to delay this burden rings hollow here. By waiting, he ensured Harry would bear both weights at once. The emotional cruelty of this timing is difficult to ignore, no matter how much sympathy we have for Dumbledore's paternal instincts. Some readers interpret this as Dumbledore's own flaw, his tendency to manipulate events from behind the scenes, always believing he knows best. In this reading, the delay is consistent, with a man who keeps secrets until revealing them serves his larger plan. Yet Order of the Phoenix makes clear that this plan misfired. The secrecy did not strengthen Harry, it isolated him, made him reckless, and allowed Voldemort to exploit his vulnerability. Even within the magical world's moral framework, Dumbledore's decision stands out as questionable. He often stresses the importance of choice, telling Harry in Chamber of Secrets that it is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are. By keeping the prophecy from him, Dumbledore denied Harry a choice about how to handle the knowledge. He took on the role of protector, but acted as gatekeeper instead, controlling the flow of truth to the very person whose life it defined. The scene in Dumbledore's office remains one of the most emotionally charged in the series, but it is also one of the most revealing in terms of character flaws and narrative logic. The old wizard's wisdom falters here, replaced by an almost parental fear that blinds him to the damage of silence. Harry walks away not just with the truth, but with the knowledge that it could have come sooner and that perhaps would have changed everything. Number 22. Percy Weasley's behaviour. Percy Weasley's role in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix takes a sharp turn that has puzzled many readers for years. Up until this point, J.K. Rowling had established Percy as ambitious, rule-oriented, and eager to rise within the Ministry of Magic. Yet despite his occasional arrogance and moments of insensitivity, he had also been shown as someone who still cared for his family's well-being. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, for instance, when Ginny was still recovering from the Chamber of Secrets ordeal, Percy's protectiveness was subtle but present. In The Goblet of Fire, his pride in Ron's role as a Triwizard champion was mixed with pompous advice but not with cruelty. These earlier portrayals make his later coldness in Order of the Phoenix feel disproportionately harsh, especially during one critical moment, Arthur Weasley's hospitalization after being attacked by Nagini. Percy does not visit, write, or even acknowledge what happened, an omission that feels almost implausible given what we know of his character. Rowling paints Percy's estrangement from his family early in the book with deliberate strokes. In the letter he sends Ron, Percy writes about the dangerous influence of Harry and warns him to distance himself from Dumbledore. His loyalty is firmly with Cornelius Fudge, who is portrayed as paranoid and determined to undermine the headmaster. Yet the narrative offers no intimate moment of Percy grappling with this choice. There is no scene, showing hesitation, no inner conflict hinted at through the eyes of others. Instead, he vanishes into the machinery of the ministry, seemingly abandoning every personal tie he once had. This works to establish him as a symbol of blind bureaucracy, but it also strips away the layered personality readers had come to know. The abruptness of this transformation becomes most jarring in the aftermath of Arthur's attack. The attack itself is one of the most tense and emotionally charged moments in the series. Harry's dream of Nagini striking Arthur in the Department of Mysteries sends the Weasley family into panic. At St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, the Weasleys gather in the Creature-Induced Injuries ward, showing their solidarity and care. Molly's worry is palpable. Fred and George bring humour to ease the tension. Ginny sits quietly near her father's bed, and Bill arrives quickly from his work abroad. Every family member who can come is there, except Percy. The absence is so conspicuous that it's not just a missing detail, it's a silence that practically echoes through the ward. Even in the text, Percy's name is not mentioned in connection to the hospital, as if he has been erased from the family fabric. In previous books, even at his most self-centered, Percy never ignored a family crisis. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Ginny went missing into the chamber, Percy was as frantic as the others. In the Goblet of Fire, when Arthur faced professional trouble over the Triwizard Tournament, Percy was defensive of his father's competence, even if he complained about his own workload. These moments, while not saintly, showed a baseline of family loyalty. In Order of the Phoenix, however, Rowling leaves Percy entirely outside the hospital narrative. No owlpost, no curt ministry-approved note, no cold expression of regret, nothing. For a character built on formality and procedure, even a perfunctory acknowledgement would have been in character, yet it never comes. Rowling might have intended this absence to underline how far Percy had fallen into ministry propaganda. He was meant to be the cautionary tale of what happens when loyalty to an institution outweighs loyalty to loved ones. Yet the scene suffers from the lack of emotional complexity. Even the most ideologically rigid people often have moments where personal concern pierces through political alignment. The omission denies Percy that humanity and makes his behavior appear not just misguided but unrecognizably cruel. When the hospital episode passes without mention of him, readers are left wondering whether this is a deliberate gap to show his corruption or simply a missed opportunity for character depth. This absence becomes even more glaring when we consider how other estranged characters behave in times of crisis. In Half-Blood Prince, for example, Draco Malfoy, under immense pressure from Voldemort, still struggles with the idea of killing Dumbledore and shows visible signs of stress. In the Deathly Hallows, even Kreacher, who once despised Harry, changes his behavior after being shown kindness. Rowling has shown she understands the power of small cracks in a character's armor. Percy, however, is given no such crack here. He is all cold front, without the brief moment that might make readers feel the weight of his choice. Some defenders of the scene argue that Percy's silence was consistent with his political stance. If he had acknowledged Arthur's injury, he would have had to admit that a dangerous attack occurred, something the Ministry was actively trying to suppress. His absence, in this view, is an extension of the denialist policies of Cornelius Fudge. However, this explanation is strained when measured against the Percy of earlier books. The Percy who, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, fussed over Penelope Clearwater's safety during the Sirius Black scare, was not one to disregard a loved one's well-being for the sake of a political narrative. The Ministry might have been his career, but the Weasleys were his blood. It is also worth noting that Percy's eventual reconciliation with his family in the Deathly Hallows comes across as sincere and emotional. His return is marked by apologies and a dramatic shift in allegiance, suggesting that Rowling always intended for him to be redeemable. But that later redemption only sharpens the oddness of his inaction in Order of the Phoenix. Readers are asked to believe that Percy's love for his family could resurface so strongly in the final book, yet was entirely dormant during one of the most vulnerable moments in their lives. From a narrative standpoint, Percy's absence also deprives the Order of the Phoenix hospital scene of potential tension and complexity. Imagine if Percy had shown up at St. Mungo's in his ministry robes, delivering a coldly formal "get well" message from Fudge, while avoiding eye contact with his mother. Such a moment could have illustrated the gulf between him and the rest of the family, while still keeping a thread of humanity intact. It would have made his eventual return in the Battle of Hogwarts more satisfying, as readers could look back and see the faint outlines of conflict already in place. Instead, we are given a blank space where a layered moment could have been. This is not to say that Percy's choice to side with the Ministry is unconvincing overall. Rowling builds his political loyalty believably, from his ambition in earlier books to his disdain for Fred and George's disregard for rules. His desire to rise in the ranks and be recognized for his competence is consistent with his personality. The leap that strains plausibility is the idea that this ambition would erase all immediate concern for a father lying wounded in a hospital bed after a deadly attack. Ambition can blind, but it rarely turns off familial instincts so completely overnight. One could argue that this sharp turn serves the thematic purpose of Order of the Phoenix, which is full of fractured relationships and mistrust. Harry and Dumbledore are distanced for much of the book. Sirius and Molly clash over Harry's upbringing, and the wizarding world itself is split between believers and deniers of Voldemort's return. Percy's complete break from his family fits the broader pattern. Yet the other fractured relationships still contain sparks of connection. Sirius, for all his stubbornness, risks his life to communicate with Harry. Molly, for all her disagreements, still acknowledges Sirius's love for Harry. Percy alone is written as if every spark has gone out, which feels narratively extreme. The lack of even a single mention of Percy's reaction to Arthur's condition makes it easy for readers to forget he exists during this part of the story. It's as though Rowling wanted him completely off-stage to emphasize his defection, but in doing so, she risks flattening him into a caricature. A moment of hesitation, a suppressed urge to write, or even a line from Molly lamenting, "Percy hasn't even sent a note," would have kept him alive in the reader's mind without compromising the dramatic break. When we later see Percy in the Deathly Hallows racing into battle alongside his family, cracking jokes with Fred before tragedy strikes, the contrast to his absence in Order of the Phoenix is stark. The reader is asked to accept that the same man who once ignored his father's brush with death could now fight at his side without hesitation. While reconciliation arcs can be powerful, they resonate more deeply when the seeds of doubt or remorse have been planted earlier. In Percy's case, those seeds are missing from the hospital chapter, leaving his redemption feeling more like a sudden rewrite than the culmination of a slow transformation. Percy Weasley's behavior in Order of the Phoenix is one of those small but jarring character beats that stand out more with each reread. It's not that siding with the Ministry is out of character, it's that his complete emotional disappearance during his father's hospitalization strains the credibility built up over 4 books. The absence is so absolute that it leaves the reader questioning whether this was an intentional symbol of political blindness or a missed opportunity for emotional realism. Either way, it remains one of the most debated inconsistencies in Rowling's otherwise meticulous character work. Number 23. Umbridge's confiscated items. When Dolores Umbridge rose to power within Hogwarts as the newly appointed High Inquisitor, her intrusion into the lives of students reached a level that seemed to defy both logic and established magical rules. She began seizing enchanted objects with a ruthlessness that felt at odds with how those items had been treated in earlier books. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Rowling describes her office lined with confiscated items: Weasley's wildfire whiz-bangs, decoy detonators, enchanted quills, and even brooms. But here lies a puzzling inconsistency. In previous volumes, such magical possessions were either bound to their owners or protected under layers of enchantments. that should have made such confiscations far more complicated. The way Umbridge so effortlessly collects these items raises questions about the continuity of the magical system itself. One particularly glaring example is the confiscation of the Gryffindor Quidditch team's brooms after the infamous match where Harry, Fred, and George are banned for life. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Madame Hooch explicitly explains that brooms, when stored, are placed in the school's broom shed under magical lock and key, locks she alone could open. This was not just a casual remark. It established a precedent in the Hogwarts world that broom security was taken seriously and maintained by specific authority. Yet in Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge somehow bypasses not only physical possession but also the magical safeguards without any mention of how she achieves this. Rowling simply writes, "Their brooms were locked away in Professor Umbridge's office, as if broom custody was a matter of walking into a shed and taking them." This is made more puzzling by the way brooms had been portrayed as quasi-living magical tools with loyalties of their own. In Philosopher's Stone, Harry's Nimbus 2000 responds to him like an extension of his will, a connection underscored by the scene in which McGonagall personally gifts it to him. In Goblet of Fire, the firebolt is subject to intense inspection by Professor Flitwick and Madame Hooch before it is deemed safe for Harry to use. Both examples suggest brooms are not casual commodities, but personal, semi-bonded instruments that require trust and magical compatibility. Umbridge's act of taking them without breaking a sweat feels at odds with that world building. The problem becomes even sharper when one recalls that in Order of the Phoenix, Harry's confiscated broom remains inaccessible for months. Umbridge refuses to return it, implying she can control and store it indefinitely. But in earlier canon, even a magically locked broom was never implied to be impossible for its owner to summon, particularly if they were skilled in summoning charms. Harry had previously mastered Accio to call his broom from great distances, even through obstacles, as seen during the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. The notion that he doesn't even attempt this spell on his own firebolt during Umbridge's regime is questionable. The absence of any narrative explanation makes it feel as though this restriction exists purely to serve the plot tension. This inconsistency extends to other confiscated magical items. Rowling notes that Umbridge displayed confiscated and banned objects in a glass case in her office, items taken from various students. In the earlier books, enchanted possessions such as the Marauder's map or even the Weasley twins' inventions were notoriously difficult to subdue without knowing their enchantment protocols. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the Marauder's map actively insults Snape when he tries to unlock its secrets, demonstrating that certain magical items resist unauthorized control. Yet in Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge somehow seizes trick wands, skiving snack boxes, and other enchanted goods with no indication of resistance or protective countermeasures. What makes this particular plot hole, the winged keys of Umbridge, as some fans have jokingly called it, so striking is that Rowling had already shown us multiple times that the confiscation of enchanted items often involved elaborate magical effort. The Mirror of Erised was moved under Dumbledore's personal supervision. Hagrid's dragon Norbert was smuggled out of the castle in a cloak and dagger operation. Even the Sorcerer's Stone was hidden behind multiple enchantments requiring teamwork and ingenuity to bypass. Yet here, Umbridge is able to dismantle protections around magical possessions with the ease of a muggle taking away a skateboard. The dissonance becomes even more pronounced when one remembers that Umbridge, despite her political authority, is not portrayed as a magical genius. Her skill set leans toward bureaucratic manipulation and cruel discipline rather than advanced magical innovation. She is not Dumbledore, Snape, or even McGonagall in terms of raw talent. So when she effortlessly bypasses enchantments that previously required specialist intervention, it creates an unintended contradiction. The lack of any description, no mention of counter-charms, no indication of assistance from other staff, makes the scene feel less like a character triumph and more like a narrative shortcut. One could argue that Umbridge's position as High Inquisitor gave her unprecedented access to the authority of the Ministry, which may have included the legal right to override personal property protections. However, Hogwarts's traditions, as shown in earlier books, were not easily overturned by outside decrees, particularly when the headmaster opposed them. In Chamber of Secrets, even the Ministry's direct intervention in Hagrid's case required forceful action and the removal of Dumbledore to proceed. That Umbridge could simply waltz into the Gryffindor Quidditch locker room and confiscate brooms without confrontation or explanation stretches the internal logic of Hogwarts politics. Another puzzling aspect is how the confiscated brooms remain dormant in Umbridge's possession. The narrative doesn't hint at them attempting to return to their owners or causing her trouble. In the magical system Rowling built, enchanted objects often display willful behavior. The Monster Book of Monsters resisted handling, enchanted chess pieces moved on their own, and even the Sorting Hat displayed personality. A firebolt, the fastest broom in the world bound to a skilled owner like Harry, seems like the type of object that wouldn't sit quietly in a corner for half a school year. The silence around this is deafening. The thematic weight of broom confiscation could have been an opportunity for Rowling to showcase the tension between authoritarian control and personal magical agency. Imagine if Harry's firebolt attempted to break free from Umbridge's office during a Quidditch match, or if Fred and George's brooms sabotaged her desk. Such moments would have reinforced the rebellious spirit of Hogwarts magic. Instead, the confiscation functions purely as a plot device to deepen Harry's sense of loss and frustration without addressing the magical plausibility. The absence of an in-story explanation leaves readers to speculate wildly. Some fan theories suggest that Umbridge might have received help from Filch, whose obsessive knowledge of school corridors could have given her access to storage areas. Others propose that the Ministry provided her with specialized confiscation spells designed to neutralize enchanted items temporarily, but these are fan patches, not canonical clarifications. In the text itself, we are simply told she takes the brooms and that's that. This lack of explanation matters because Rowling's earlier attention to magical consistency is one of the series' great strengths. The Sorcerer's Stone's protections, the rules of Quidditch, the precise limitations of spells like Actio. These details made the wizarding world feel coherent and lived in. By breaking those rules without acknowledgement, Order of the Phoenix briefly undermines that coherence. The Winged Keys nickname among readers stems from a sense that magical items, once given rules, should continue to follow them, much like the enchanted keys guarding the stone in Book 1. Even the emotional payoff is dulled by this oversight. Harry's anguish over losing his firebolt would carry more dramatic weight if the reader understood the immense magical difficulty of taking it away. Instead, the loss feels artificially engineered because the mechanisms behind it are invisible. The confiscation scene serves its purpose in building resentment toward Umbridge, but does so at the cost of internal logic. Ultimately, the confiscation of brooms and other enchanted items under Umbridge's rule in Order of the Phoenix stands out as a rare moment where Rowling's world-building stumbles. The inconsistency may not ruin the book's momentum, but for readers attuned to the established magical framework, it's a snag in the otherwise seamless fabric of the series. It reminds us that even in a richly constructed fantasy world, the small details matter, especially when those details have been previously treated as immutable laws. In the end, Umbridge's trophy case of confiscated goods becomes less a believable byproduct of her authority and more a symbol of narrative convenience. It's a reminder that while magic in Rowling's world can make almost anything possible, the rules governing it must still feel consistent. When those rules bend without reason, even the most despised character's victories feel hollow. And in the case of the Winged Keys of Umbridge, the absence of explanation leaves a gap that readers continue to puzzle over long after the book is closed. Number 24. Posters of Sirius. When the events of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix unfold, Sirius Black is already a figure shrouded in infamy. To the wizarding world at large, he remains the escaped murderer from Azkaban, a man who supposedly betrayed James and Lily Potter. The Ministry of Magic, under the rigid and manipulative control of Cornelius Fudge, spares no effort in turning public opinion against him. Yet in this grand propaganda campaign there lies a peculiar and easily overlooked inconsistency that reveals a curious crack in J.K. Rowling's otherwise meticulous world-building. The Ministry, in their supposed quest to capture the dangerous fugitive, plaster the wizarding streets, pubs and newspapers with the very same moving photograph of Sirius that first appeared during the Prisoner of Azkaban crisis 2 years prior. This detail, while seemingly minor, invites uncomfortable questions about logic and realism in the wizarding world. The infamous image itself is burned into the reader's memory. Sirius Black in a filthy prison robe, gaunt and unkempt, glaring from behind the bars of his Azkaban cell. It is the photograph printed in The Daily Prophet in Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, complete with the chilling caption, "Have you seen this wizard?" The moving image snarls occasionally, his lips twitching in frustration or rage. It is an effective piece of fear-mongering, but it is also a relic of a moment that by the time of Order of the Phoenix is far removed from the current reality. The Ministry's choice to recycle it wholesale raises the question, if they truly wanted the public's help in finding him, why not update the image to reflect what Sirius looked like now? By the 5th book, 2 years have passed since Sirius's escape. He has been seen in various parts of Britain and even beyond, sometimes under Polyjuice Potion, sometimes in his animagus form as a shaggy black dog, but sometimes in public as himself. Harry sees him in the fireplace of the Gryffindor common room, looking weary but healthier than before. At one point he visits Harry in person during the Christmas holidays at number 12, Grimmauld Place, his hair tied back and his demeanour calmer, though still restless. Given these interactions, it stands to reason that the Ministry might have acquired a newer likeness. Magical law enforcement in Rowling's world is not without tools. There are enchanted mirrors, owl-post intercepts, and even wizarding surveillance methods hinted at in Order of the Phoenix, such as when the Ministry tails Harry after the Dementor attack. Even the most basic real-world comparison makes the Ministry's decision odd. In Muggle criminal investigations, police frequently update wanted posters with more recent photographs or artist sketches. Faces change, people age, gain or lose weight, grow beards, cut their hair. In Sirius's case, he would no longer look exactly like the starved prisoner of Azkaban. In fact, Rowling describes him in Order of the Phoenix as a little fuller in the face, his hair longer than Harry had ever seen it. If the Ministry truly wanted him caught, surely a newer image would increase their chances. The decision to stick with the outdated, prison-worn portrait feels less like strategic police work and more like lazy bureaucracy or an author reusing a familiar image for narrative shorthand. One possible in-universe explanation is that Cornelius Fudge and the Ministry were less concerned with actually finding Sirius than they were with keeping the public afraid. The Azkaban photo projects a dangerous, unhinged criminal, a face designed to shock. It reinforces the narrative that he is a murderous lunatic, rather than the falsely accused man he actually is. A newer photo, perhaps showing him healthier or calmer, might undermine that fear-mongering image. In this sense, the Ministry's recycling of the old photograph becomes less a blunder and more a calculated piece of propaganda. Yet even if this were the case, the tactic would still contradict the stated goal of catching him, since accuracy would be sacrificed for emotional manipulation. Another layer of irony emerges when we recall that the Daily Prophet has never shied away from publishing updated, intrusive photographs when it suits their needs. Rita Skeeter's tabloid articles in Goblet of Fire come with crisp, magically moving shots of Harry, Hermione, and even Hagrid, all taken without consent. Colin Creevey's school photographs capture high-resolution images of Hogwarts students on a whim. Clearly, the magical community is not lacking in photographic capability. In this context, the Ministry's failure to update Sirius's wanted posters feels even stranger. If a teenage student with a hobby camera can produce sharper, more recent images, what excuse does an entire government have? The flaw becomes even more apparent when considering how much Sirius risked exposure in the years between Prisoner of Azkaban and Order of the Phoenix. He travelled to Hogsmeade, he communicated with Harry in public spaces like the post office fireplace, and he even appeared in the Department of Mysteries battle in the climax of the 5th book. While the Ministry might not have had witnesses who knew where to look, it strains belief to imagine that no one, wizard or squib, ever caught a glimpse of him that could be turned into a more recent likeness. The wizarding world's equivalent of sketch artists or magical photographers could have easily produced an updated wanted image from eyewitness descriptions. Rowling's choice may also have been influenced by a desire for visual continuity. In the film adaptations, the wanted poster for Sirius in Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the most memorable props. Daniel Radcliffe's Harry, staring at it in the leaky cauldron, the magical photograph of Gary Oldman screaming behind the prison bars. By reusing this imagery in Order of the Phoenix, both the books and the films maintain a recognizable symbol of Sirius's fugitive status. For the reader or viewer, it instantly signals danger, but from a storytelling logic standpoint, it risks pulling the audience out of the immersive world by highlighting a convenience made for dramatic effect rather than plausibility. There is a subtle way in which this reused photograph even undermines the tension of Sirius's fugitive arc. In a believable manhunt, the danger lies partly in the idea that the authorities are actively adapting, closing in on the target. By showing the same worn 2-year-old photo, Rowling's Ministry comes across as static, almost incompetent, an unchanging enemy whose bark is louder than its bite. While this may fit the portrayal of Fudge's administration as corrupt and ineffective, it dilutes the realism of the stakes. A truly dangerous ministry would have evolved its search tactics, making Sirius's survival more perilous and his interactions with Harry more suspenseful. Interestingly, this inconsistency also interacts with the book's broader theme of truth versus propaganda. In Order of the Phoenix, much of the plot revolves around the Ministry's denial of Voldemort's return and their smear campaign against Harry and Dumbledore. The wanted posters for Sirius, featuring the same old image, could have been an intentional visual metaphor, proof that the Ministry cares more about maintaining a narrative than pursuing reality. If so, this is a clever subtext, but it remains undeclared in the text, leaving readers to wonder whether it is an artistic choice or an oversight. There's also the possibility that Rowling underestimated the degree to which her audience would notice such a detail. The Harry Potter books are packed with intricate subplots, magical creatures, and shifting alliances. In such a densely woven tapestry, small inconsistencies can slip through unnoticed by casual readers, but for attentive fans, especially those rereading the series, these moments stand out sharply. The reused Sirius photograph becomes one of those minor, yet oddly telling moments where the machinery of storytelling peeks through the curtain. In a real-world investigation, the use of an outdated image can have dire consequences. The public may overlook the suspect because he no longer matches the description, or, worse, they may accuse innocent people who resemble the outdated likeness. Transposing this into the wizarding world, it is entirely plausible that a witch or wizard might ignore Sirius if they saw him, thinking he no longer looks like the gaunt prisoner in the poster. In fact, the older photo could have inadvertently aided Sirius's ability to move undetected, a bitter irony for the Ministry. The detail also invites speculation about the limits of magical law enforcement technology. Perhaps magical photographs, unlike Muggle ones, are more difficult to forge or update without the subject's cooperation. Perhaps the Ministry, in its arrogance, underestimated the need for accuracy because they believed no one could evade them for so long. Yet these explanations must be invented by the reader, for the text offers no such clarification. This silence leaves the moment feeling like an unintentional gap rather than a deliberate mystery. From a character perspective, it would have been fascinating to see Sirius react to the outdated image. Imagine a scene where he scoffs at the poster, noting how the Ministry can't even bother to update his likeness. Such a moment could have added depth to his relationship with the corrupt government hunting him, underscoring his sense of alienation and bitterness. It would also have reinforced the book's themes of truth manipulation and incompetence in power. Ultimately, the recycled Sirius Black photograph in Order of the Phoenix stands as a small but intriguing crack in the illusion of Rowling's world. Whether it is read as a storytelling shortcut, a deliberate metaphor for propaganda, or an oversight, it draws attention to the tension between narrative drama and in-universe realism. In a series that often blurs the lines between magic and politics, this detail, seemingly trivial, becomes a lens through which to view the wizarding world's priorities and failings. The Ministry wanted the public to fear Sirius Black. Whether they truly wanted to catch him is another question entirely. Number 25. The moving staircase. The scene in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, where the staircases of Hogwarts decide to shift under the feet of Harry, Ron and Hermione, is a moment rich in atmosphere but strangely poor in consistency. Rowling paints the image vividly. The three friends are hurrying toward the meeting of the Order of the Phoenix, the air filled with urgency, the castle cloaked in its usual twilight of flickering torches. Then, without warning, a staircase slides away from its original position, depositing them in a completely different corridor. It's an effective device for tension, forcing them to take a longer route, heightening the sense of obstacles in their path. Yet when this moment is held up against the rest of the book, it exposes a curious crack in the logic of the world she has built. For in dozens of other scenes, they roam the school freely, climbing flights of stairs without any such unpredictable interruptions. What makes this inconsistency striking is not merely that it happens, but that Rowling herself had established earlier in the series that Hogwarts staircases are prone to such behavior. Back in the Philosopher's Stone, the staircases were described as changing when they felt like it, a whimsical hazard that every student learned to navigate. In the first book, the randomness was part of the school's charm and danger, creating minor chaos and unexpected adventures. But by the time of Order of the Phoenix, these living staircases seem to fade into the background, only awakening from their narrative slumber when the plot demands an obstacle. Here, the magic of the castle begins to feel less like an organic, ever-present force, and more like a prop wheeled onto the stage for dramatic effect. If the staircases were truly as unpredictable as the first book described, there would be no reason for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to expect a straightforward path to any location. Their daily movements would constantly be disrupted. Students would have to build in extra time to get to class. Professors would excuse tardiness as a fact of life, and meeting at a specific time would always carry an element of uncertainty. Yet, throughout Order of the Phoenix, they attend classes, visit the library, and wander between the Gryffindor Tower and the Great Hall without a single mention of being rerouted by a capricious staircase, until, of course, the one moment it serves to delay their arrival. The difference is especially obvious if we compare it to the numerous passages where the trio navigates the castle in this very book. Consider the sequence where they sneak into Umbridge's office to use the fireplace. They cross multiple floors, pass through hidden doors, and not once are hindered by shifting architecture. The staircases here are obedient, almost pedestrian in their function. It's as if Hogwarts itself knows to step aside and allow the urgency of the plot to unfold uninterrupted, except when Rowling wants to inject a sudden complication. The magic, in this instance, stops being a living part of the setting and becomes a selective tool. One might argue that perhaps the staircases do not always move, that they have periods of stillness and activity. But the problem is that this explanation never appears in the text. The inconsistency is not explained or justified, it simply exists. In a world where magic has rules, even if whimsical ones, those rules must be felt by the reader as continuous. The unpredictability of Hogwarts architecture should have been a constant low-level presence in the narrative, shaping the daily life of the students, rather than a rare inconvenience rolled out for drama. The book even gives us an unintentional contrast that makes the staircase incident feel contrived. Earlier, when Harry and Hermione rush to the hospital wing to see Arthur Weasley after his attack, they navigate the castle with frantic speed. The stakes are high, their minds are racing, yet nothing interrupts their journey, not a staircase, not a moving portrait, not even Peeves. In this moment, Rowling lets them glide through the school without interference. The choice is deliberate. The tension comes from the urgency of their news, not the obstacles in their way. But when they are hurrying to an order meeting, suddenly the castle decides to remind them of its whims. This selective application feels too neatly aligned with the needs of the scene. A particularly telling moment comes when the text describes the shift. The staircase they were on moved, rumbling slightly underfoot, and came to rest facing an unfamiliar corridor. It's an echo of first-year adventures, a callback to the magical chaos of their early days. But it also stands out because it feels almost nostalgic, as though Rowling remembered, in that instant, the world-building she had once established and decided to reinsert it. The result is a moment that, while atmospheric, risks jolting the attentive reader out of the story. It raises the question, if the staircases are still this unpredictable, why has no one mentioned it in hundreds of intervening pages? Some might see this as a minor quibble, but in a series as richly detailed as Harry Potter, small fractures in internal logic can become glaring. Rowling's greatest strength lies in her ability to make magic feel lived in, to make readers believe that Hogwarts is not just a backdrop, but a breathing, shifting entity. The inconsistency here undermines that illusion. A truly magical castle would not pause its enchantments between plot beats. Its personality, playful, stubborn, unpredictable, should be felt in every corner, whether the moment is dramatic or mundane. The issue becomes even more evident when we think about the practical implications for the characters. In their 5th year, Harry and his friends are juggling classes, secret DA meetings, detentions with Umbridge, and countless other responsibilities. If staircases regularly shifted, they would be a constant factor in time management and strategy. There would be times when they might exploit the moving stairs to evade Filch or mislead an enemy, yet such uses are absent in Order of the Phoenix. The staircases only hinder, never help, and only when Rowling needs them to. This selective portrayal of Hogwarts magic can be seen as part of a larger pattern in the series, where certain magical elements fade into the background once their novelty has worn off. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, for instance, is breathtaking in the first book, but by the 5th it's barely mentioned unless there's a storm or something significant in the sky. While this makes sense in terms of the characters' familiarity with their environment, it can create moments where the world feels thinner than it once did, moments where the magic is no longer a constant companion but an occasional guest.